I run the YouTube channel Low-Spec Action Squad, and what we really focus on is garbage. I pull computers out of dumpsters, I find them in landfills. You can literally go to a scrapyard and usually find piles of vintage Pentium 1, 2, and 3 systems. Just, you buy them for scrap money, what its weight in metal is. We're talking a couple bucks. Some of them actually work, which is beyond me, but, whatever works. So, we are going to focus on the Windows XP era, maybe Windows 9X. Loving the unlovable. Learning to love low-end hardware. I'm not much of a purist. I want to play old games. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. Let's establish what vintage is. If you Google it, what you'll usually find is 20 years is vintage. Let that sink in for a moment. Yes, I should be wearing that Vista hat after all. The community definition is non-existent. It varies by who you ask. You ask one person, it's 25 years. You ask another, it's 50. You ask another person, and then they're like 21 years old, and they'll go, oh yeah, I remember vintage stuff. Windows 7. Real conversation I've had. So the real problem with this is an awful lot of what all of us love is all on personal opinion, and that's great. But going back to the accepted facts, we're going to stick with the Google definition of 20 years. Vintage Computer Fest in 1997, that was the first Vintage Computer Fest. A lot of the systems that were brought that year were the IBM 5150. Do you know how old the IBM 5150 was in 1997? 16 years. 16 years old. So if we're going by those rules, Windows 7 really is vintage. So I don't like that. Let's get past that. Okay. A real conversation I had with someone who had graduated college. They remembered growing up with a family PC that had a 4770K. I will let that sink in again, because we all hate that. They consider that vintage. This is going back to that other thing. Vintage is very subjective. Now let's establish what a low-end piece of hardware is, and my best example for this is graphics cards. When you get into motherboards and other stuff, it's a little more up in the air. We have the same problem, the community definition versus the actual definition. You ask one person what low-end is, they might tell you that a 3070 is a low-end graphics card. I take offense to that. But is there an actual definition of what is low-end? Do you go to Newegg to buy a new graphics card and say, yes, let's select the low-end drop-down button? And then there's, of course, mid-range stuff, because you can't have a low-end without mid-range. You don't go from high straight to low. But what's mid-range? And what is the overlap? Let's go to the GTX 700 series, the 750 Ti, a rather legendary graphics card. It had some pretty good performance for a very low price. A lot of people, myself included, considered that to be a fairly, at the time, mid-range card. But a lot of people considered it to be more of a low-end card. Those people had they were in a different tax bracket. But the point stands, what is low-end? What can we agree on? Most people can agree that if it costs less than $200 now, it probably does reside in the low end of the market. Based on the FX series from the early 2000s, anything less than $150, probably low end, if it released for that much back in the day. So we're going to mostly base our hypothesis, if you will, on $150 or less. How can we love this stuff? Well, for me, I find a lot of this stuff literally in the garbage. I find them on the side of the road. Barn finds, that's usually reserved for automobiles, but I actually found a Texas Instruments TI-99 in someone's garage, and a Dell with a Pentium 2. That was a V400, I believe it was. Very poor naming conventions back then, mostly because it wasn't a 400 megahertz Pentium 2, so that was confusing. Is it actually trash? That is a very hard to answer question because, again, we're getting back to these subjective things. One person's trash is another person's treasure. We've all heard that. My biggest thing on my YouTube channel is the fact that there is no such thing as bad hardware, just bad use cases. I remember getting very upset back in the day. This is GTX 700 series. We're back to graphics cards. I'm sure a few people here have heard of Linus Tech Tips. And I'm like, hey, they've got a new review. They reviewed my graphics card. He hated it. I like this card. I had a, before I got my 750 Ti, I had an R7 240. Objectively, a pretty bad graphics card, but it played all the games that I wanted to at more than 5 frames per second, usually. You know, I played GTA 5 on that. That was a long time ago. Ooh. So when I saw someone dumping on that card, I was pretty upset because that's my favorite card. It's the only one I've ever owned at the time. Linus didn't consider the use cases. I had a slim PC. All of the cards that he would recommend would not physically fit in a PC that required half-height graphics cards. He was looking at it from the wrong use case. E-waste is indeed bad. I think all of us would rather see anything that functions go to someone who can appreciate it than throw it out. There's less and less of this stuff every single year. And there are too many cases where someone goes, I've got a pile of GeForce 4s. Welp. I hate to see it. But I also love to see it because then I take it. So, focusing for a moment just on graphics cards. The S3 Verge, very much maligned. No one likes that card, even myself. But it has really good DOS drivers. Exceptional, I'd say. Especially if you're using Windows 9X to get into DOS. That's kind of where its strong suit is. When it released, it was a pretty bad card, but you go back a couple years and it'll run just about anything. Great driver support. The FX 5200, I actually don't own an ATI 9250, but I've heard good things about it. Again, very good driver support, and the FX 5200 will outperform an awful lot of the Windows 9X cards at like a tenth of the price. Seriously, have any of you actually tried to find a GeForce 256? How much did that cost? Too much. The 8400 GS, genuinely, embarrassingly, my favorite card. This came in everything, OEMs, prebuilts. You could find them basically anywhere. It's in your popcorn at the theater. It is very, very good for Windows XP. I don't play a lot of the last vestiges of Windows XP games. I kind of stop at the Battlefront 2 era, but that'll run Battlefront 2 at almost 60 FPS. Is that not excellent? And the variants. I'm going to surprise a few of you today. Of course, there's a PCI Express version, there's a PCI version, there's an AGP version, there's even a PCI Express X1 version. Have you ever seen an X1 graphics card? It's real. It exists, and it can hurt you. The X1, and it also has almost no performance deficit. That tells you a little about the 8400 GS. So the X1, funny enough, was actually designed by HP for the HP prebuilts because they had a somewhat fake PCI Express X16 slot. I forget what it's called. It's like an ADDT slot or something. It's basically an expansion slot only for the onboard graphics, and if you tried to put a regular graphics card or any expansion card in it, it would not work. Took me a long time to figure that out, embarrassingly enough. But the X1 allowed you to actually expand that system with a not completely garbage card. It was better than onboard graphics. But all those different variants, I mean, you can take an 8400 GS and put it in just about anything, and they still have very good Windows 9X drivers. So if you've got a Pentium 3 and you want a cheap graphics card, there you go, 8400 GS. It's not era appropriate, but it'll do anything you want it to. The GT730. We all know that that's low end. We can agree on that at least. It has XP drivers. I'm not actually sure about Windows 9X. I don't think it does. I think it stops at Windows 2000. But the GT730, although it's pretty much garbage for anything past 2011, it will play just about anything for XP at nearly maxed out graphics. And it sips power. That's great. Especially if you've got one of those OEM computers that has a 165 watt power supply. Looking at HP. The GT430. Even I struggle to love this card, but it has a PCI version. And the GT520 and the 610, it's literally the same chip with a different name. NVIDIA's wonderful for that. But again, PCI. A lot of OEMs did not have AGP, or they didn't bother to populate the slot on the board, mostly for cost reasons. You can put one of these in there, and you'll have a very good Windows XP gaming experience. And I believe the 430 does actually have Windows 98 drivers. A little overpowered for it. Now, you're probably going to have some weirdness because it is a Fermi card, but still, you get the point. Now, the FX 5200, my second favorite card. That's blasphemy to a lot of people. Often found in trash OEM PCs. I say that because that's where I get most of mine. The FX 5200 was included in everything, and it had so many different rebadges. You can find it not just as the FX 5200, but you can find it as the FX 5500. It's the same chip with a slightly different clock. That's pretty much it. Although there is a couple of variants. There's a 64, there's a 64-bit memory bus version, and there's a 128-bit memory bus version. There's barely any difference. There's also the FX 5100, extremely rare, and it's basically the same card. They just lowered the name to make OEMs like it and pretend it was cheaper. It is insanely cheap. Before this show, I bought one on eBay. That's right, eBay. For $6. And that's an AGP card. You find me an AGP card for less than $10, and I'll be very, very happy, and I'll probably buy it. It does have a PCI variant as well. A lot of the OEM systems that I get, especially HP, I don't know why HP liked to not populate the AGP slot on the motherboard. They only have PCI. So if you want to get something other than onboard graphics, this is one of the cheapest and most plentiful things you can get. It is capable of running a whole host of games. This will run Battlefront 2. Not at 60 frames per second, but at a very respectable 40 to 50, depending on your resolution. It'll run the game. And that's the bare minimum. That's what most people that just want to sit down and play a game. And although I would hesitate to recommend this for a Windows 7, it does technically have Windows 7 drivers, but it does have excellent Windows 95 and 98 drivers, which technically means it's a good DOS card. Technically. I like technically. Chipsets. This is where a lot of folks do not really agree with me. OEMs are not the worst things you can get. Oftentimes they'll have cut down chipsets, but they still boot into Windows, don't they? You can put a graphics card in and run some games, can't you? A lot of the bonus stuff that these chipsets don't have, you don't really need. As with what I mentioned earlier with the 8400 GS, I'm not the sort of it has to be exactly as it was in 1997 type of guy. If I find a Pentium 3, I'll pair it with a GT430. I have paired some with some GT430s. As long as it works, and does what I want to do, and gives me the experience that I want and enjoy, I'm happy. Bad chipsets. There's a few out there. We'll get into those. But they still boot into Windows, don't they? That's one thing that a lot of people kind of forget as their collections grow and they're able to become a little more picky, is just because it doesn't have all the features doesn't mean that it's garbage. Although if you think it's garbage, I'll take it. PCI. I have talked a lot about PCI versions of graphics cards. It is very usable. Yes, you do get some performance hit, but you still get the card to work. A PCI FX 5200 will outperform an AGP GeForce 4 MX440 any day of the week. And fix the capacitors. I cannot tell you how many people do not realize that video cards are also susceptible to the capacitor plague. And just plug it in, the capacitors explode. Well, how did that happen? They were bulging before you put them in. That's how it happened. I have brand new MX440s that have bad capacitors. They're bulging, they're leaking, they've never been touched. You must replace the capacitors. No AGP is no problem. This kind of, again, hammers home the PCI thing, but just because something lacks AGP doesn't mean you should just pass it up. And that's because... I have this out of order. Excellent. So let's dive into VIA. I'm targeting 2003 for a very specific reason, and that's SATA. VIA was one of the first manufacturers to put SATA on their boards, and they did it wrong. You, if you try, or me, because I did try, to use, a normal hard drive with those boards, won't work. It'll do really strange things. It'll cause Windows XP to just partially boot. It'll not boot. Maybe you'll install it, but then it'll never boot from there on. But they still have IDE. Just don't use the SATA. Don't buy it for the SATA ports. VIA's SATA ports are almost exclusively useful for optical drives. Found that out the hard way. Backwards compatible PCIe. A lot of people have the incorrect opinion, or idea, that Windows 98 cannot see PCI Express graphics cards. This is wrong. I have done it on videos several times. Phil's Computer Lab has a very good video on this. But if you pick up like a 8400 GS in PCIe, it'll have Windows 98 drivers. It'll run. Onboard graphics are awesome. Anyone here ever had the Enforce 2 chipset with an onboard GeForce 4? There we go. That's excellent. The GeForce 4, although not exactly a performance king, again, it'll play just about anything. You want to run some Unreal Tournament 2004? There you go. It'll run it. Just lower your resolution a little bit. We're looking at 800 by 600 at the max. Under spec for XP is over spec for 98. So if you've got a, let's hypothetically say, an LGA 775 Celeron, that'll kick butt for Windows 98. There's not a single 775 Celeron that won't outperform a Pentium 3. Yes.
What about cache? That's always been like the Achilles heel for a lot of the Celerons.
That's true. Once LGA 775 came around, the Celerons had a lot more cache even than the proper Pentium 3s and Pentium 4s back then. So an LGA 775 Celeron will always outperform even the best CPUs from the Pentium 3 generation. Even with... Yes. Yes, absolutely. The cache in comparison to a Pentium 4 in the same socket is much lower, but we're thinking Windows 98 here. So you bring that to Windows 98, you're going to have a really, really great experience. Plus, I'm pretty sure there was the 2.8 gigahertz bug for Windows 98. So if you go faster than that, you get some really weird performance. Sound cards. I have much less experience in this, but I do have a lot of experience with sound cards who I can't Google. It's great. Usually for those ones, Windows XP already has a default driver, which works for me. That's what I usually use because XP is what I grew up on. Sound Blaster clones. These are a dime a dozen, and I literally mean, at least for now, still a dime a dozen. You can find these everywhere. And for the most part, they're fully compatible. By the early 2000s, the other manufacturers had really caught up. The Sound Blaster Live, I'm sure everyone here knows what this is. The Sound Blaster Live came in a lot of pre-builts at the time. I have yet to find a Dell that doesn't have one. It has excellent Windows 98 drivers, excellent Windows 95 drivers, and believe it or not, Windows 11 drivers. You can use the Sound Blaster Live on Windows 98, bring it to your new PC if it has PCI, and there you go. You can still listen to it. If you look for these drivers, look for the Community Edition. I don't know what neckbeard in his basement made those, but I am very happy that they did. mostly because I deal with a lot of server hardware, and server hardware doesn't come with sound, so I need that Sound Blaster Live. Onboard sound is fine, especially if you just want to play the game. Most people will not be able to tell the difference between a mediocre onboard sound chip and the highest end Sound Blaster, unless we're talking like the late 80s. Onboard sound did have a little bit to go back then. I think onboard is good, because that's one less slot that you have to occupy. And if you're using a pre-built PC, bless you, if you're using a pre-built PC, oftentimes they don't have that many slots. I can't tell you how many AGP-less HPs I've got that only have 3 PCI slots. That is tough, especially if you want to add, I don't know, USB support? That'd be great. So that's one slot, then you got your graphics card, and if you got your sound card, well, now you're out. But if you got onboard sound, use it. Where do we get this beautiful, delectable garbage? I mean, it kind of writes itself, doesn't it? You get it out of the garbage sometimes. That's where I get most of my systems. I have a bit of a problem, perhaps. However, there are occasions where I'm like, you know what? I want something, and I don't want to go driving around, diving through dumpsters and coming back smelling. So I'll hop on Facebook Marketplace. That's where these things seem to congregate these days. I mention Vista because Vista is usually from the Core 2 Duo era. Sometimes we're talking Pentium Ds. Vista, everyone hates, which means if it has a Vista case badge, it'll be cheap. They see that most of the time and go, well, this computer's trash, and then they throw it up. I've found a Vista PC that had a 7800 GT in it. I got it for $5. I was a very happy boy that day. Garage sales, and I don't mean go there, browse around, and then leave. Ask the person, because most of the time they don't put out their old PCs at garage sales. Recently, I was at a garage sale, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, man, there's just nothing here. But then I'm like, hey, you got any old PCs? And they go, well, I got one. Do you really want it? And that's how I got my Molar iMac for $40. Thrift stores. This one is very hit or miss, because a lot of thrift stores these days look to eBay. We have the internet. They know what this stuff's worth. So if they care enough, or if they're greedy enough, they will list it for eBay prices. And that sucks. But sometimes, every now and then, you'll find something that's just odd enough that they won't know how to price it, and you'll get like a Pentium 3 for $50. That's good stuff, and by Pentium 3 I mean the entire system. This is your last resort if you've exhausted all of your other options. AliExpress does actually have vintage computer parts. There's a lot of re-chipping that goes on in China. You'll find a ton of FX 5200s and 5500s that have been harvested from their old boards, usually with bad capacitors, and replaced onto a new board. That's the only way to technically get a brand new, non-bad capacitor FX 5200. But you'll be paying at least $40 for it, plus shipping. eBay's no better. Mercari's no better. Mercari is similar to eBay. It's just a non-auction site. People put their stuff up there, they put it for a price, and then you can offer something less, but it's hit or miss. Now, what do I want you to take away from this talk? Just because it's low-end doesn't mean it can't be useful. I never had a lot of money growing up, so the low-end was my jam. I would take stuff apart just to harvest the components and then combine them into one beautiful, barely better computer. It was wonderful. I learned a lot. I also killed a lot of hardware back then. I'm very sorry. Sometimes the limitations are part of the fun. If I've got an FX 5200, the silicon lottery is very prevalent on those. I've overclocked one almost 3 times. That is insane. Can you imagine overclocking a card 3x today? You're lucky to get a couple hundred megahertz today. So, on the other hand, I've also had ones that were barely stable at stock. It's exciting. especially when you get that feeling where you've got a stable overclock. You're like, I just doubled my performance. This is amazing. Even if I'm still only getting a couple dozen frames per second in something newer than Battlefront 6, the feeling is good. The right hardware for you is whatever you can get your hands on. This is more in reference to people who are just getting into the hobby. In this economy, if you go on eBay and look up, like, I don't know, what's a good car that people like? Voodoo 3? You know how much those go for? I can't afford that. That costs more than my car did. No joke, by the way. I got my car for $400. Yes. So, if you want to get into this hobby, sometimes you just have to deal with your mom's old Core 2 Duo. It's good. You'll play games. You'll be happy. And then eventually, when you've got a little better spot in life, you can grab something better. Keep vintage computers accessible. There are a lot of people who are hoarding old hardware and are selling them for top dollar. And there's nothing wrong with that. They are technically preserving this hardware and making it more accessible for people to get. It's just not very affordable. So if you're looking to get into this hobby, sometimes the low end is the only end. Click to exit presentation. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Regarding the getting into the hobby, starting out at low end, I have to disagree because until you know what you're dealing with, getting into it is going to be very, very resistant.
That is very true. I was more thinking of the perspective from someone who just doesn't know anything about the hobby. They just want to start with something, maybe run XP, play a little bit of Unreal. So it's a lot easier to figure out what you want after you've been messing with things for a few years. Very good point, though. Any other questions? Yes. Absolutely.
So there's this whole discussion of what's vintage and what's not vintage.
Yes.
I've been doing a lot of vintage gaming stuff, and I always my go-to is now if it's not the previous generation, if they're no longer selling the games at GameStop, or if they just change that. If they're no longer selling those games at GameStop, then it's retro. They're under my and like so we're laughing like Windows 7.
Oh, yeah.
Is now vintage. Well, that was released what like almost 18
Yep.
17, 18 years ago, and you can no longer run x86 on any modern PCs, within the past 10 years or so.
Right.
So
Now, I've got to hand over, but that goes right back to the exact same point. That's not what I wanted to do. Where is power off? Shut down. That goes right back to the first Vintage Computer Fest in 1997. It was only 16 years after the IBM 5150, and that was featured a lot. I mentioned that at the beginning. You have a very good point there.